quick intro of why you're here today, talking about property. Jade, maybe you'll start?
Sure. I'm Jade Van Riel. Thank you so much for the introduction. You made me sound amazing. I bought my first home at 23, and that's, I suppose, what a lot of people know me for. But I have a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about it, and because of that, I like to just help other people get onto the property ladder. I feel like that's my mission in life now, and that's why I'm here.
Okay.
I am Sarah Davison. I'm the Knowledge and Product Editor at This Is Money, which is the money bit of the Mail Online. And I have been writing about mortgages and buy-to-let, so more from a landlord's perspective rather than the tenant's perspective, for 13 years now. So, and it all on the very, very technical side. I'm a total mortgage geek, I love it. And I am here today because actually one of the things I care passionately about is access to that world. It's still so complicated. They don't do themselves any favours. The way that people talk about mortgage finance is alienating from the off. And for most people, it's such a daunting prospect, and also the house buying process is just so complicated. I mean, if you manage to buy a house, well done. So that's why I'm here, just to kind of, I suppose, give a bit of insight into what it all means, I hope.
Thank you.
Well, I'm here because I really care about housing. I think your home is where everything in your life stems from. So if you don't own your own home and you're renting and things are uncertain, that can impact every part of your life, particularly if you're a woman, because we're more likely to be on our own with kids and have to worry about school catchment areas and all this stuff. We also earn less, so it is harder to buy a house than it is for the average man. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, and I think I own a home, you own your home. I actually don't know about your situation. But it can be done. I guess I'm coming at this more from the renter's perspective. Obviously, as you mentioned, I did the campaign that got letting fees banned. I really care about renters' rights. I think if we can make renting more cost effective, then it will be easier for people to save to buy a home. I'm now the housing correspondent at the iPaper, so covering the housing market more broadly, and like you, I'm really passionate about access to that world and to understanding house prices. Why do they fluctuate? When's a good time to buy? And I think if we can kind of democratize that knowledge, then we'll be in a much better place.
Great, thanks. So I think actually we'll start with you, Vicky, because I wanted to start with renting, because actually renting is maybe your biggest expense. On average in the UK, it costs slightly less than £1,000 to rent a place, and in London it's 1,600. So it's huge. I was more wondering in terms of, okay, when you're renting, what are your rights, how you can protect yourself. And I wanted to talk about your campaign, because you've been an activist, so you did this campaign in 2016 with the debrief. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that and your role and what you managed to achieve?
That was like a long time ago now. A lot's happened since then. I suppose at the debrief we had a big audience of millennial women, and we were trying to think about, women's magazines have always done campaigns, so we were thinking, what could our campaign be? What do our audience care about? And the thing that kept coming up over and over again was housing, the cost of housing. Now, the rental situation is a bit of a mess, and there was no one thing we could do that would solve the whole crisis. So I had actually just moved and paid, I don't know, like £1,600 in fees on top of rent, and that was on the deposit. And it was so much money. I didn't have that kind of money. I had to take out a loan because I don't have family that I could ask. And I was sitting in a meeting with my editor, and I said, this is what we should do. Obviously, because I'm a journalist, I researched the hell out of it and was like, these fees are banned in Scotland, they've been banned since 2012, why did I just have to pay this? And I saw that Shelter had been campaigning on it for a really long time. Shelter's a housing charity, for anyone who doesn't know, and they hadn't been successful. So what we did was we got this petition on change.org, we managed to get, I think it was nearly 400,000 signatures in the end. The government saw that loads of young people were interested in it. They realised it was making them look really bad. They started inviting me to speak at things, and one day, and this is literally how policy change happens, and I'm always really keen to tell people about this because it's there is no dark art. I think you just have to be in the right place at the right time. I was on a panel with Gavin Barwell, who was then the housing minister, and at the end he leaned over to me and he gave me his card and he was like, I'm really into this, I think we should talk about it. And then the law changed after we talked about it.
So I asked actually on Instagram last week, do you have any questions for our panelists in terms of renting? A lot of questions were around, okay, how do I protect myself? How do I make sure I recover my deposit? Is my landlord, does he have to actually change my boiler? So can you give us a little overview of your rights as a tenant, or actually where can you find this information?
So I will caveat this with saying I'm not a housing lawyer. So I can't give too much legal advice, and absolutely the best places for that are the Shelter website and the Citizens Advice website. In terms of deposits specifically and fees, so what came out of my campaign was the Tenant Fee Act, which fortunately became law before Parliament dissolves this time. Who knows how much longer it's going to last. I was quite worried about that. And that means that fees are now illegal. So if you are charged fees, then you absolutely need to report that, because you shouldn't be being charged them. Deposits are capped at 5 weeks rent. So that is what you should be being charged for a deposit. And again, if you're not, then do something about it and report them. I'm not going to say which agency it is, because it's a story I'm working on at the moment, but there is one massive agency who keep trying to charge people fees, and then when they question it, they're like, oh no, sorry, that was a mistake. So it is
still trying.
Yeah, but on all the other stuff, it's really murky, and it does vary from situation to situation. So I would say definitely check out the Shelter website and Citizens Advice, and know your rights. Like, that is the most powerful thing. But unfortunately, renters just don't have as many rights as they should have. So another big campaign that Generation Rent were actually spearheading, they're a campaign group, is about the end of Section 21 evictions. Because as things stand, your landlord can, once you're in your tenancy, they can just evict you without having to give you a reason. And until that's gone, renters don't really have that many rights on that front.
Okay. Well, and Sarah, maybe we can talk about more like how much you should pay in rent. So I guess the issue now is more people are renting their places. By 2025, half of the under 40s will be renting privately. So landlords have more and more power, so they can put the rents up, and I guess that's the biggest challenge for tenants. So how much of your salary, of your income, should you pay in rent, and how can you avoid
there is no rule here, and you shouldn't be paying any specific proportion of your salary in rent. What I would say is always negotiate, be brave. I rented last year with a guy who I used to work with, who's now a journalist on the Evening Standard, and he is the cheekiest person I have ever met. And we went in there, and it was expensive. And he said, I think we should offer this. And I was like, oh, are you joking? That's so rude. We can't do that. And he was like, watch me. And did it. And they said yes. And I saved myself £200 a month. And that was my half of what we saved a month. So that money can go straight into a bank account and, go towards your deposit. I would definitely say negotiate. All landlords it's more important to them to rent a place than to get the amount that they're asking for. Their priority is to cover their mortgage by a certain amount, kind of over their mortgage payment with your rent. And if they're doing that, then they'll probably say yes, because the more times they say no to a tenant, the longer they've got an empty property, the worse financial position they're in. So you're actually in a stronger position than you think you are on negotiating.
That reminds me of all these salary negotiation stories now, that men go and negotiate their salary and women don't. So.
Be cheeky is what I learned. Be really cheeky. But unfortunately, the reality is, depending on where you live in the country, and certainly in London, where I'm sure most of you live, rents are unbelievably high, and it does make it very difficult to have any kind of disposable income that you can put aside. in order to save. If you ultimately are renting in the interim and you'd like to be putting that money towards your own mortgage and your own capital appreciation rather than your landlord's, it's a problem.
And how do you see the impact of Brexit on the rent? So I guess more people want to buy. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market.
I mean, there's no scientific answer to this. I think the housing market as a whole has definitely felt an impact, not from Brexit, but from the uncertainty that it has created. Yeah. Businesses are not investing, and that has a knock-on effect on consumer confidence. I know that I would rather wait and see, put off any big financial decisions until after we have some kind of clarity around what's going to happen and how it's going to affect the economy. And I'm not alone in that. That's showing across the whole of the economy. So it's slowing down activity enormously. But I wouldn't say that there is a direct impact on rents. I would say that the number of transactions in the housing market in terms of people buying and selling has dropped dramatically. That has a knock-on effect sort of further up the ladder, if you like, to do with pricing of mortgages and appetite to do risky things, and that's the effect that you're seeing from Brexit. But unfortunately, I wouldn't say Brexit has made rents drop or rise.
Rents are actually going up.
Yeah.
Rents are going up, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Clay, now it's your turn. Since you've been a property owner for a little while, and you managed to save all this money, and 23 is quite young to buy your first property. How can you save money while renting, and especially if you're in London? Didn't you, I guess all your friends were spending money on other things, so did you cut yourself out of any like social life, or how did you practically do it?
I did, and actually while I was saving, I was actually kind of renting, not in a sort of traditional way. I was living at an aunt's house and she was sort of asking me for money for a room. So I completely do understand when you have got other priorities alongside saving. It is difficult, and I think the problem is that a lot of people think it's impossible because you are kind of comfortable and you're used to what you're doing. But I always recommend people to sort of look at their expenditure. One of my followers actually, after watching some of my videos, decided to downsize. So she was renting a whole house and she decided to just move into a room. And that was one way that she could then save a lot of money. She also got rid of her car because she wasn't using it. She was using it only on weekends, and she thought, you know what, for the sake of trying to save, I'm just going to go all in for a short period of time and hopefully that will help. What I was doing whilst I was living at my aunt's, paying my way a little bit, £400 a month, which was a lot at the time for me. I was bringing food into work, I was not spending, I was not buying clothing, I was selling clothes on eBay, I wasn't going out. So yes, I missed out on so much things. At the time it felt like I missed out, but now I'm really happy that I did it. And I don't regret doing it because now I'm in a better position to kind of see what I've worked for. And now a lot of friends ask me for advice and want, you know, the help and the advice and tips that I did that they didn't understand at the time. But it is difficult, it's not easy. I would never say it is easy, but I do believe it is worth it. But it is dedication and sacrificing.
And you want to buy another property now?
Yes.
So do you have your goals, you have your budget, and then you have the same like...
I feel like this time is actually harder for me. Although I've done it already, I think getting myself back into that place is what I'm finding difficult, because I've had 3 years now since I bought my home, and I've sort of decided that I'm going to now make it my time, because it was all about my home for a while, 7 years, and now getting back out of that is difficult. So all of the tips that I've said in videos I'm now looking back on trying to implement in my own life. However, this time will be with somebody else, so at the same time it should be hopefully a little bit easier because it's 2 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can I ask both of you, do you still see advantages in renting versus buying? Because then we're going to talk about buying a property, and I guess it's the holy grail. I mean, especially in the UK, everyone wants to own a property. So, I mean, are there any advantages in still renting?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think it offers massive flexibility. And in terms of, we all change jobs much more frequently than people used to 20, 30 years ago. And you don't necessarily know where you're going to be. So it offers you a really flexible access. It's like instead of owning a car, doing zip car, right? It's kind of like zip home. I don't know. you could argue. So yeah, the flexibility is brilliant. I also think that I was saying this earlier to Jenny, that I think there are downsides to owning your own home that people forget about when they're kind of thinking about the dream of home ownership. And that renting, actually, you don't have all the responsibility that goes with owning a property, like managing agents and repairing the roof and when the boiler breaks and all of those sorts of things. So it's very expensive, certainly, especially in certain places in the country. But actually, your capital outgoings are much more predictable. So I think as a temporary living solution, it does offer a lot. I've done both, and I would definitely say that renting caused me fewer headaches than owning.
I guess it depends, though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
because
always.
If you are a single person, you're young, you're financially independent, you're working, deciding what you want to do, you might want to live abroad, then great, renting's fab. But so many of the people I interview, mums with children who are renting because they can't afford to buy, that flexibility then becomes instability. So I think it's a really important distinction about class, where you are in your life and what your situation is. So for me, the flexibility right now, I'm a homeowner who would quite like not to have the responsibility of that home for various reasons at the moment, but I'm stuck with it. And it is a financial burden because I've gone down from living there with a partner to being on my own, and I now have to earn enough money to pay that mortgage. So if I was renting, I could just move and move somewhere cheaper, and I can't. So that is a consideration. But I'm very aware that for the vast majority of renters, they are increasingly a demographic who would have been living in social housing. We don't have enough social housing, so people who were in social housing have moved into the PRS. The problem is that entire system isn't fit for purpose because we don't have the protections that we need. A lot of the properties aren't up to scratch. I've seen some places that you wouldn't house your worst enemy in. So I think it can have advantages, and definitely I'm looking at renting right now and being like,
that looks great.
Yeah,
I think so. You asked earlier about how do you protect yourself as a tenant, and what do you do in a situation where your landlord's not fixing your boiler. And we get a lot of readers get in touch with us with similar questions. And as Vicky said, your best bet is to go to shelter, go to citizens advice, get some legal advice. Come to This Is Money, ask us, we'll fight for you. But the reality is that it's often not cost effective to actually act as a tenant in that situation. So you might have the right, it might be protected legally, as in your landlord is responsible for providing you with accommodation that is fit for purpose. But if they don't, there's not really any comeback. Nothing really happens if they don't.
Well, you can report them to the council, but then councils are overstretched and their renting teams don't have the time, so it might take months for them to get to you. And then when your landlord finds out you've reported them to the council,
they'll evict you.
They'll evict you because of Section 21. So I think it's really important to be honest about the fact that renting is, in this country, unlike a lot of countries in Europe, you just don't have the protections that you need, and tenancies are too short. So again, like the flexibility of a 1 year assured short hold tenancy for some people is great, but for another person that's an incredibly unstable situation.
So I would
say, well, just to come off of that, from my point of view, the only advantage I would say is the only advantage I would say, and from my point of view for renting, is the lack of the lower responsibility aspect, just because of being someone that has had so much responsibility. But again, I still like the responsibility. So.
Yeah. And because in terms of buying versus renting, people think, okay, I'm buying because it's a great investment, but actually I'm thinking buying is an investment the day you actually sell your property, because until you actually sell it, then you don't recover your money. But at the same time, so I bought a property a few years ago, and I would definitely not afford to rent where I'm living today if I was paying the rent with my children. So I'm quite happy because my mortgage cost me maybe half of what I would pay in rent. So for me, that's one of the big advantages maybe of buying versus
at the moment,
versus
because
renting
mortgage
at the moment.
rates
Exactly.
are so low.
Yeah.
And I think we are, as a generation, in danger of thinking that that's normal.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not going to last forever. Or at least, if it does, then we're all buggered. So that's an important point to make. At the moment, paying a mortgage is so cheap because interest rates are so low, but interest rates, Brexit notwithstanding, will go back up, and that will become more expensive.
Yeah. So that maybe we come back to then affordability. So what can you afford? So I think even like before going into like property ownership, just make sure you can afford your mortgage, you can afford the price of the house. So maybe Jade, you can start with telling us what do you think is the total cost of buying? Because we all have this headline number, that's the amount you have to put in the property, the deposit. Yeah. But then what else? Because there's actually a lot of costs associated with buying a home.
Yeah, there is a lot of things associated, and I think a lot of people do just think about the deposit and you're in, but you have fees. I had to pay stamp duty. I think I was the year just before it was at certain brackets. So I had to pay stamp duty, you pay your mortgage broker if they have a fee on top, you pay your solicitors. So there are all of those fees before you step in. And then when you step into your property, if you buy an older home like I did, you have so much that you need to do. You have your first month's mortgage that comes out just wow. And you know, for me, when I bought my property, my accounts were just empty after that, and then it was like, reality is straight into it. There is no break, there is no pause. So I always recommend over saving. I would definitely say maybe 5,000 upwards, just to make sure that you're super comfortable when you move in. The more the better, you won't regret it. So yeah, there are a lot of hidden fees. And also another fee that people don't discuss is the valuation fees. If you wanted to put an offer on a property, you would have to pay for that property to be valued before your bank actually accepts the offer and says, yes, that property is worth what you're saying. So these are all the different things that come up before you've even stepped in, before you even own it. And they're definitely key things that you need to be prepared for if you want to buy a home.
And what was the process like for you? So when did you start saving? How long did it take? And then in terms of like looking for a place, negotiating your mortgage, how long did it take?
So for me, it took quite a long time. I bought my home at 23, literally a few days after my 23rd birthday. And I was saving for loads of years. I always sort of calculated to be about 7 years. So whilst at college, whilst at uni, during uni, everything I was saving. I didn't have the actual idea of what I was saving for, but it was something that my dad was constantly on me about, saving my money. My mom was the complete opposite, and she was like, just enjoy your life. And my dad was the opposite. So I had a lot of moments where I would go into my savings and just clear it all out, and then think, oh my God, my dad's gonna ask me how my money is doing, and there's nothing there. So there was a bit of back and forth for a few years, but on and off, I was constantly saving. And then when I left uni, I decided, I was studying law, I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, and actually I'm going to go straight into working and focus on saving. And it was then when I decided I needed to buy a home, because I didn't want to go back home from uni to my mum because I felt too independent. But then I was like, well, I don't earn enough to rent right now, because that was madness. I literally grew up down the road and it is very expensive, so I knew that wasn't an option for me. So I moved in with my aunt, and that's where I was able to really save alongside paying her. But my focus was just saving as much money as possible for 2 solid years. And then I thought I was well off of a deposit, but my dad set up a meeting with a mortgage broker, and he said I was ready, which surprised me. I thought I needed a lot more. But I guess after 7 years, I mean, it was quite a lot to save, yeah.
Do you remember how much you saved?
Yes, in total it was about 32,000, and I put a deposit down of £27,000.
So So Sarah, can we talk about mortgages? Because I guess most people want to buy a place, they need a mortgage, and they have a huge mortgage. So we talked about interest rates. So there's of course the risk associated to a mortgage, but if you don't leverage your purchase, I mean, in London, it's going to be really hard to buy a property.
Impossible.
So what's the best way? How do you get started? You actually talk to mortgage brokers. What's the best way?
Well, save first, obviously. I would just add to Jade's story that there are actually loads of tools that will help you to save now available, which have only kind of come onto the market in the past couple of years. So I invest actually through an app called Moneybox, which every time I spend on my debit card, it rounds it up to the nearest pound and it puts all of that money into stocks and shares ISA. And I've saved £3,000 in 2 years, and I didn't even notice that happened. I mean, absolutely incredible. And a lot of the newer challenger banks like Monzo does it, Starling also does it, when it's the same thing, and it will sweep your savings, sweep the kind of excess change into a savings account. Halifax also does it as well. I'm sure there are others. So I would definitely recommend sign up to all of those things, and then you will save without even noticing that it's happening, and I would have just spent that money otherwise. But in terms of, once you've done the prep and you've got the money in the bank account, in terms of getting a mortgage, it can be a really daunting prospect. A lot of people don't know where to start. They go to their bank, which is a good place to start, actually, depending on which bank you're with. So most banks, high street banks, will have mortgage advisors in their branches or available on the phone, or they often have online offerings as well. It's important to know that if you do that, they are only ever going to tell you about their mortgages, and they may or may not be the cheapest mortgages available. And really, when you're buying a mortgage, you do want to think about price, right? Because there's two things really. Am I going to get it, and how much is it going to cost every month? And they're both relevant, because you don't want to go for the cheapest one and then get rejected, because that's going to impact you when you go, okay, well, didn't get that one, I'll try for the next one. That's going to set you back when you make that second application. So you only want to apply for one that you're definitely going to get. But then secondary to that, the cost every month is really, really important. The best place to go if you're thinking about that and you want actually a view of everything that's available in the market is a mortgage broker. And that's another nightmare world to kind of navigate, because there are lots and lots and lots and lots of different mortgage brokers, some of whom are brilliant, others are not, being completely blunt about it. I've met some absolute chancers in that world.
So how do you know they're good about that?
So at This Is Money, we recommend, in all seriousness, we recommend London and Country, which is a really big fee-free broker. So the way they do get paid when they arrange a mortgage for you, the lender will pay them a commission.
That you pay.
That you pay factored into the cost of your mortgage, but it doesn't sort of come straight out of your bank account in one go at the front end. They are very, very good. We always get really brilliant feedback on them. I know the people who run that business, and they're good guys. There are also a lot of newer, kind of more millennial focused online type brokers. So you might have heard of Trussell, you might have seen them on the tube. Also Habito. Again, great, good tools for using to sort of see how much you can borrow and go through that process. And again, they're both fee free. I would say that most people like to have a conversation with someone, actually, rather than just doing it online. You might want to have a chat. So when they say, do you want a fix or do you want a variable rate? And you're like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what I want. What do I want? And that's why having a conversation with a broker is a good thing. But yes, the things to check are, who does this broker deal with? Because some of them are tied, so they'll only deal with a couple of lenders or a few lenders or maybe 10 lenders, but there are 120 lenders out there. many of which you will never have heard of, and especially if you fall into a bracket like you're self-employed, you're freelance, maybe you missed a phone bill payment 18 months ago. If you are that person, you definitely want to go to a mortgage broker because they have access to lenders that you don't have access to as a consumer, who will look at your circumstances and they will try their hardest to help provide you with a mortgage. Whereas if you just go to your HSBC branch, they'll say no. And they're not going to say, but if you go down the road and speak to my competitor, you might get a yes. Whereas a broker will deal with that for you.
Okay. So affordability, then look at your budget, check your credit score, I guess is useful. So
yeah, so there are a few, like, you know, if you're going to buy a house, you need to make sure you're on the electoral roll.
Yeah.
First of all, definitely try and pay down as much of your unsecured debt, so credit cards, student loan, all of that kind of thing, because that will impact on how much your lender is willing to lend you. So the way that they calculate how much you can borrow has changed. It used to be a fairly sort of straightforward, you can borrow 3 to 5 times your annual income. And then they changed the rules in 2014, and it's now calculated based on what you can afford, which means if you've got 3 credit cards, a store card, a car loan, and you're paying childcare, you are not going to be able to borrow 5 times your income, or even 3 times your income. In fact, you're probably not going to be able to borrow anything at all. So it matters what your fixed outgoings are each month. So you want to, if you're preparing, get those to an absolute minimum ahead of time before you go to the point at which you're applying for a mortgage. And I would say do that for 3 months before you do your application, because most lenders will ask for 3 months bank statements to show your financial position.
And if you're a freelancer, you need your accounts?
Yes, there are different
more
rules.
than 3 months, right?
If you're self-employed, under any circumstances, whether you are a sole trader or a freelancer or a contractor or a limited company owner, there are different rules, and different lenders have different rules. It's an absolute nightmare to navigate. Definitely get a broker who will be able to help you. But fundamentally, rule of thumb is that you will need a minimum of 1 year's signed off accounts or your tax return, so a form called the SA 302, which is basically the form that you get once you've submitted your self-assessment tax return, to prove your income from previous years. And then most lenders will actually ask for 3 of those, so 3 years going back, and they'll take an average. It's slightly different for contractors, funnily. There's no rhyme or reason for this, but for contractors, they will quite often look at your daily rate and then provide you with so they'll multiply that up by the number of days that you work in a year and then take a proportion of that as sort of guaranteed income, so maybe like 60-65% of that. So it depends on how self-employed, like how you are self-employed. But yes, it's much harder, I would say, to kind of get your finances in order.
Yes. Okay.
If you're self-employed.
Yeah. No, I know. We just remortgaged our place, and it's a nightmare. They just scrapped They didn't even want to see my accounts. I was like, what? Well, and that was a lot of paperwork compared to my husband, who's like, you know, he has his salaries and stuff, and that was much easier. Vicky, you mentioned buying with a partner. So I wanted to look more like socially. I mean, I think people have changed because they realize they can't afford to buy it on their own. So a lot of people have been postponing this buying decision and thinking, okay, I'm going to wait and maybe buy with my partner. And other people who are really lucky are also getting money from their parents, and there's this new trend called the bank of mom and dad. So I mean, they're very lucky. But can you talk about these two things? So should you buy or not with a partner? And if you can get help from the parents, great. But I think that's a bit like killing the market also.
Well, we know that an increasing number of first-time buyers are accessing the bank of mum and dad, but that doesn't mean that
That's a real term now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I actually had lunch with someone recently who wants to set up a company called the Bank of Mum and Dad. I was like, I think you're kind of missing the point. But that's how it's just entered like our normal conversations now. Yeah, it's a lot easier to buy if you can get help from your parents. I have heard stories of parents remortgaging to help their kids buy. Wow. So obviously this is going to have a knock-on effect on all of our futures as a whole because, okay, so take my grandparents, for instance, recently, they've sold their home to pay for care. Great, that's really important. If you remortgage to help your kids and then something happens to you and you need that money and you've taken on debt later in life, you could be in a real crisis. And I think we are increasingly becoming aware of the looming social care crisis and the impact of our generation maybe not having equity that we can release when we get older, our parents passing that money down and maybe not having it. So I think that's something that's really important to be aware of. The Bank of Mum and Dad doesn't always mean you've just got really rich parents who can give you like 50k, although I definitely have heard of those stories as well, and that's great for those people. And if you can do that, obviously you should. Like I wouldn't begrudge anyone that. It's really, really difficult to do it otherwise, although it can be done. But we've both done it, it can be done. I did Help to Buy. A scheme I think is incredibly problematic for multiple reasons. What it's done to the market, which is something I've written about.
Can you just explain Help to Buy briefly for?
Right, so there's two Help to Buy schemes. One is an ISA, where you pay in a certain amount every month, and then you get a bonus at the end, and you can use that towards your deposit. The other is an equity loan, which is currently scheduled to stop in 2021 or 2022, I need to check.
No, they extended it from 2021 to 2023.
Okay. So,
but they're restricting how they apply it. So the value of houses that you can buy at the moment has no restriction. But next year, I think if you're in certain geographical areas, you'll only be able to buy a house that's worth there's a ceiling on the amount of.
And it's now restricted only to first-time buyers as well, which wildly it wasn't up until this point, which is a complete scandal and partly why it has inflated house prices in certain areas. That being said, I used it and there's no way I would have been able to buy without it. I have serious concerns about whether I'll ever pay off the equity loan. I don't see that being able to happen. I recently interviewed one of the advisors who was behind it, and he was like, great that you used the scheme. Have you started paying off the equity loan? I was like, how much money do you think I earn if I use the scheme? Like, it's like a £200,000 loan. No, I haven't paid it off. So good pros and cons to doing that, I think. But it comes back to what we were talking about before, which is like when you're renting, you own nothing of nothing because all of your money is going to your landlord. When you own a home, whether you own it outright, whether you do shared ownership, whether you do Help to Buy, you are paying towards something. So unless house prices completely crash, then you will have something at the end. Although, again, that being said, I recently had my flat valued, and I am in negative equity. So I think it's really, again...
And that poses its own issues and is one of the things that we don't talk about enough in terms of home ownership. You stretch your finances to the absolute limit to get on the property ladder and realise this dream of home ownership. And especially in a market like that we have today, where house prices are not going up everywhere, you are the person who takes on the risk. It's a really tricky thing because you live in your investment, and that's not true of any other investment you make. And every other investment you make, you will be told time and time again up front and at the point at which you buy and the point at which you're like signing on the dotted line, the value of your investments can go down as well as up. You are aware of that, right? And people don't tend to say that so much with houses.
Well, because we've just told ourselves a lie, which is house prices will always go up. But they don't.
They definitely don't.
Falling. In the southeast, in the southwest, in London, house prices are falling.
And if you places, people who sort of bought into that dream prior to the credit crunch, who bought in Northern Ireland where prices were just going through the roof, they are still in negative equity over 10 years later. In some places in the northeast, people who bought using Northern Rock mortgages, 125% loan to value, so worth. So they took on debt that was worth more than the house was worth. They are still in negative equity. And when you come to remortgage, I mean, in some ways, it doesn't matter, right? If you take a mortgage and you just pay every month and you're in negative equity, that doesn't really matter. It's a paper loss. It doesn't mean anything until you come either to sell, at which point you crystallize that loss, and you're the one who pays the price, because believe you me, the lender will get their money back, or you need to remortgage. So most people take a 2-year fix or a 5-year fix. When you get to the end of that deal, you'll roll onto something called standard variable rate. Now, you can get a 2-year fix for under 2%. Standard variable rates average at 5.5%, which means average. So think about that, right? Some people, some lenders, are charging 12, 15% on their standard variable rates. Now, if you happen to have taken a loan like you, and you happen to be with one of those lenders, and then you come to the end of your 2-year fix, and you're in negative equity, that lender is not going to give you a new deal. You are going to roll onto standard variable rate, and your mortgage payments have gone from 2% to 12%. Do you know what that means in money if you've borrowed £300,000?
So if you're in this situation, what do you do? So do you go and remortgage, or do you at least try to remortgage?
Well, I guess it depends, right? Negative equity sounds really scary, and it is, but
Can be.
yeah, if you're planning to stay in the property, then you don't, like, as you say, you don't really need to worry about it as much. I took out a 5-year fixed term because I anticipated this with Brexit and thought it was a very real possibility. And I think that anyone considering buying right now, the market is probably the wildest it's been in a while in terms of we're not, since the last crash. I mean, I think we're about to have another recession. All the indicators are that there is something coming. So it's very important.
And Bank of England is saying they're going to keep the rates low at the moment.
Yeah, so
anyway,
I think rates will
short term.
stay low for quite a while, actually. I think we differ slightly on that, because what we've had in the past in the 90s where interest rates spiked and most people lost their homes, they don't want that to happen again, and I think they'll do everything they can to avoid it. We won't have like a foreclosure crisis like they had in the States.
I agree with that, definitely.
Because it would be economically so bad for the economy as a whole. I think there is an awareness that that needs to be avoided no matter what, and especially after Northern Rock as well. And that's why they don't offer those wild loan to value ratios anymore. But on that subject, 100% mortgages are back. We haven't really seen those since the last crash. Good and bad, again, I think if you know what you're getting into, knowledge is power in any situation, right? It's like what I was saying about Help to Buy. If you know what you're doing and you have money to fall back on and you're going to pay above and beyond what you have to pay every month, like you're going to overpay, which is what I try and do with my mortgage, then yeah, maybe take the risk. If you're someone who's not great with money and you're not going to overpay and you're going to struggle to meet that, and you don't, know for sure that your earnings are going to increase, I do think with what house prices are doing, it's quite a big risk to take.
And I think the key thing to remember is that as a home buyer and home owner, the risk lies with you. The buck stops with you. It is a responsibility. It's not just a dream come true.
And house prices won't always go up.
No.
I had this wild moment recently at a family lunch with my uncle, and he'd been reading some stuff I was writing recently. He was like, "The thing you don't understand, Vicky, is that house prices just always go up. That's what they do." I was like, they don't. Like in the last 20 years, that's not what's happened.
And also, you think, like, you read the headlines about house prices are still going up, they're still going up. You have to remember that those numbers are averages. It doesn't apply to any single person in the market. An average is basically a meaningless number that sort of smooths out all the behavior that's going on in a market. It depends on your house, the one that you bought. So different things happen with new builds from what happened with existing properties, depending on your specific location. Not even just if you buy in London you'll be fine, but where you buy in London and what happens across the road and what happens to the crime rate in your area. And
so you research everything before you buy? That's what you do? Like you go for like a super specific area?
You need to research everywhere. Any area that you're interested in, you need to look at crime, you need to look at schools, you need to look at the history. There is a really good tool.
Planned transport.
Yeah, there's a really good tool on Rightmove where you can actually see the values of properties, what things have sold for on your road, what the actual property sold for before. And to counter what you're saying, I think it's different everywhere. I think if you are sort of London focused, then you may think prices aren't going up or everyone's doomed. I don't really agree with that to a full, because based on my experience and where I've purchased out of London in Essex, I've seen something completely different. And I do think you see something different based on if it's a newer home or an older home. I know many people who have bought newer homes using Help to Buy, etc., and have had similar issues of actually I'm in negative equity now. And that is something I always try to get people to just look at and really research that, because you do sometimes pay over the premium for a newer home, and then when you want to sell or whatever, if you just want to get it valued, you'll be surprised. It's not always true, of course not. There is always something, there's always different things, like you said, on a road, in a block, everything can vary, but it's all about researching that specific place, that specific home, to actually really see, if it's worth you buying.
I would add to that as well. And even if you're a renter, really, you should be doing this. Do not think about your life in terms of the immediate future, next year, the year after. Think about 5 years, 10 years. So what do you think you're going to need to live in 5 years' time? Well, if you're buying a one-bedroom flat because you want to get on the market, 5 years' time, do you want to have kids?
Yeah.
Where will you want to raise those kids?
Exactly.
Look at house prices there. Think about projected growth in your area. How much will your flat, house, whatever you bought be worth? Will you be able to buy what you need for the next step? So I think it's about more than just the immediate getting on the property ladder. And also, is it a long-term investment, right? So I knew in my area we might not see massive growth in the immediate future, mainly because Brexit, like every sentence now is like, and because Brexit. But long term, I do think that area probably will continue to go up. It's a really good location, it's super close to the city. If I can hold on to that flat, live somewhere else, these are all considerations. Massive caveat, obviously, as someone who cares about the housing crisis, is now I'm part of the problem, because I want house prices to go up. And once you have a stake in the system, that very much becomes your prerogative, which is why we need a lot more regulation of the PRS. Or stabilisation of the housing market as a whole, because the problem we've got now is people who've paid a premium for one beds, who want to have kids, need a house, can't afford to make that next step. And that's what's clogging up the market.
I think that's also your point about think about where you're going to be in 5 years and in 10 years, because if you are a first-time buyer and you don't own a property, you don't have to pay stamp duty on that first purchase at the moment.
Oh, you will on the next one.
You will on the next one. So you have to factor in not only what you want to do, but the fact that it's going to cost you tens of thousands of pounds more than you think it's going to cost you, because you haven't had to factor that into the first step. So don't waste that first step buying something that you're going to own for a year. Invest that discount that you've been given as a first-time buyer from the government in something that is going to last you longer.
Yeah, I agree. Also with what you were saying about thinking about the future, and not buying something that is just for now. That also, I think, applies to areas as well. As a first-time buyer, if you're from London, you probably immediately just think, I have to buy somewhere in London, that's all I know. But in 5-10 years, do you want to live in that area? So even though it's the size of the property or the amount of rooms, it's also the areas as well. And also, will you benefit? Would you want to raise your family there? These are all things that you should consider when buying a property. I know it's your first one, but they are all really important, because if you are stuck with it, you want to know that you've made the right decision.
And if you are going to buy with a partner, which I did, please just have a plan. I didn't have a plan, and we've broken up. And this is happening to more and more people. Have a plan in place.
Speak to a lawyer, get a contractual, legal document that says this is what happens in the event.
Exactly. Because it's much harder to get out of a mortgage than it is a marriage. Don't want to scare you all, but I think this is really important that we empower ourselves with this knowledge. It's harder to get out of a mortgage than it is a marriage. And I knew this and still didn't really plan for it.
Because the only way you can get out is I mean, either you one buy the other out, or you sell the property and then you repay the debt, right?
Yeah, you have.
And that has costs. I mean, if you took a 5-year fix
Yeah,
and it's a year in, you're going to end up paying extra because most mortgages come with early repayment charges.
They have early repayment penalties. Help to Buy has penalties. Some shared ownership schemes, I think, might have penalties too. So it's really important to think about these things and consult a lawyer, get a prenup. If you're buying with a friend as well.
Because you're both responsible for this mortgage. So basically, if the other one can't pay, then you have to pay each share.
And you are both joint and severally liable for the entire debt.
Yeah.
Which means that if someone is just irresponsible and disappears over the horizon, Yabu sucks. You're on the hook for the whole lot.
Okay, so I just have one.
I was going to say, I think we should probably talk about the schemes.
Yes, please.
So Help to Buy and also shared ownership.
Yeah, and maybe lifetime ISA also. So I know it's slightly different, but maybe Sarah, do you want to talk about this? So what are your options? What are the schemes available when you want to buy if you're a first-time buyer, or maybe if you're not a first-time buyer?
Right. Well, there are two savings schemes that are worth looking at. I would say they're probably not the only savings schemes, but two that are definitely worth looking at. Help to Buy ISA, which is only available for another couple of month, and a lifetime ISA, which is sort of its replacement, but is a bit more complicated. Both allow you to save tax-free. You can either save in cash or you can invest. I would, depending on how long you're planning on saving, recommend that you invest. If it's more than 5 years that you think it's going to take you to save, invest it, because that will definitely bump up your returns. I don't say definitely. I mean, it's likely to bump up your returns.
Give you any financial or legal advice.
No, and also investments can come down as well as go up. But I would invest. If it was me and I was saving for longer than 5 years, I would invest that money because it's likely that you'll see a better return than the interest that you would be paid on a cash.
I think the XP recommendation is 3 years. But I agree with you, for me it's 5.
I would say 5, yeah, especially at the moment. And then if you take that money out of the lifetime ISA, in order to buy a house, the government will give you a bonus top up, and I think it's
so you can save up to 4,000 a year and you get 1,000 pounds extra. So it's like 25% return on your investment already.
Which is insane. If you think about interest rates on cash savings, the best interest rate available in the entire market on an easy access cash savings account is 1.5%. That is huge benefit. So definitely worth doing.
But there's a cap also with the lifetime.
Yeah, there's a cap, so you can only save up to a certain amount and benefit from the bonus. You can save more. With a lifetime ISA, if you take the money out to do anything other than buy a house or pay for your retirement after you're 55, you won't get any of the benefit. So none of the bonus will be payable to you. So that's the sort of the downside, if you like, but it's not really a downside particularly.
And also there's a cap on the value of the house. So if you want to buy in London, unfortunately the lifetime ISA works if you buy a house under £450,000.
Which, good luck,
if London,
find a house.
Less than that in London. I mean, you can still have one. I personally have one. I already have a home, but I'm just using it because I get this 25% return. So if you're a basic rate taxpayer, it's better than what you're getting on your pension. And you can use this money when you turn.
And you can have it as well as
you can use it as something else.
Yeah, I'm a homeowner and I have one as well.
Yeah, but I guess they're going to scrap the lifetime ISA in a few years' time because
they'll realise it's too expensive.
It's so good and people find it complicated to use.
So those are the two things. So if you're in the saving part of your journey, definitely look at the lifetime ISA and look at the Help to Buy ISA. If you open that tomorrow, you still benefit, but you need to do that quickly because they are bringing that scheme to a close. And then in terms of buying, there is also the Help to Buy equity loan where the government will give you some cash in exchange for a stake in the appreciation of the value of your house and also the depreciation of the value of your house should it go that way. In London it's up to 40%, everywhere else it's 20% of the value of the house, and then you get a mortgage for 75% of the value of the house and you need to put in 5% as a deposit. There are pros and cons to this, as you've already explained. One of the biggest cons is when you come to remortgage. So the equity loan is interest-free for the first 5 years. After that, you start paying interest to the government on that. It's not very much, but it is something. That will impact how much you can borrow on the mortgage because of the affordability calculations. And also, there are far fewer lenders that will agree to remortgage the mortgage part of the debt against your home than will give you the Help to Buy loan in the first place. So your options as you go through the ownership journey get narrower and narrower, and that ultimately results in the cost going up. So that's something to consider.
And it can mean, this actually has happened to a couple of people I know, you are then stuck moving into another Help to Buy property, which, because they scrapped the original scheme way back, which meant you could use the loan on any property, not just new builds, now means you have to be in a new build, which obviously you end up paying a premium on because they're more expensive than second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand, whatever-hand homes. So,
and then there's shared ownership, which is similar in that you share, you usually buy in tandem with the housing association. It's normally new build again, and you own a proportion of that home. So the deposit is much smaller, you can get much more house for your money, and you pay rent on the bit of the house that you don't own to the housing association. Normally a bit cheaper than market rate because it's housing association provided. Again, that gives great access to home ownership for a lot of people, but people don't tend to talk about or think about what happens afterwards and how they then get out of that agreement. And as far as I know from speaking to people who've done it, it's incredibly difficult to get out of it. The terms are not in your favour, and you will struggle with mortgage finance on the remortgage element of that. Doesn't mean it's not worth doing, and if you think about the money that you're putting into the house in the first place, you probably, depending on how long you're in it, will end up coming out with a bit more than you went into it. The question is whether or not you can deal with the hassle.
But with both schemes, there is something worth mentioning, I think, which is this concept of staircasing.
Yeah.
So you can, like I was saying before, you can overpay. So if you're someone like me, for instance, I write books. So every couple of years, hopefully I'll get a lump sum, like I just did with my book, which is actually how I managed to buy this flat. Then great, you can just whack a chunk on the loan. Or
within limitations
yeah.
of what's allowed in your contract, and that depends on the type of product that you've got.
That you've signed up to, yeah. But you can staircase, particularly with shared ownership. The idea is that you will buy a greater percentage of the property, but the costs that come with that, every time you do it, you have to pay.
Yeah, and I would say also with staircasing, they've not quite designed it with the customer in mind, because in the vast majority of cases, if you want to buy a bit more, they'll be like, yeah, that's great, you need to give us £10,000. Not, oh, well, I've got £2,500. I thought that was quite a lot. Can I just put that towards? No, you can't put anything towards it until you've hit that number.
Yeah, you can only go up
very
10% increments.
Well, they've actually, Boris's government have done very little on housing so far, but they did announce this, I think, pretty terrible policy of allowing shared ownership owners to do 1% increments.
That's cool. Which would be great.
Yeah, I think it would be great if they weren't so costly. So if you weren't paying legal fees
every time
you staircase 1%, because by the time you've done that, you've probably paid. I don't even know how much. But if they can sort out that end of the policy, then yes.
I think with Help to Buy and shared ownership, the main thing is having a plan with those. Have a plan either way, whatever way you buy a property, but especially with those schemes, a long-term plan, because you will be spending a lot during that, especially if you are going to staircase or if you have the equity loan that you have to pay for. You need that plan. Are you planning to stay there just for a few years and try and sell? Have these things in mind before you even get into it.
And so you want to buy another property? Can I ask you, are you getting another mortgage, or you managed to repay the mortgage on your property?
So I will hopefully be doing it with somebody, and thank you for your advice, especially with the legal stuff. So my boyfriend has his own flat as well, so we're hoping to buy a house together. So I will be taking that advice, and we may be taking equity out, but also saving as well. Thank you. So yeah, a bit of equity and saving. I think that's the plan, hopefully.
Yeah. Great.